Today we're going to read the first part of chapter 15 of the City of Ember. It's a pretty long chapter, so we'll read the first part and you'll get some more clues about what will happen to Lina and Doon. The title of the chapter is A Desperate Run. Chapter 15. But this can't be right, said Doon. If the river is the way out of Ember, why is there just one boat? It's only big enough for 2 people. I don't know, said Lina. It is strange. Let's look around some more. They stood up. Doon went back to where they'd left the boxes and got another candle. He brought it into the room and lit it, and the room grew twice as bright. Right away they saw what they hadn't noticed before. In the back wall was a door almost as wide as the whole room. When they went up to it, they could see that it too was a sliding door. Doon took hold of the handle that was on the right and pulled sideways, and the door rolled smoothly open to reveal more darkness. They stepped in. They could guess from the echoing sounds of their voices when they spoke that they were in a tremendous room. Though the ceiling was low, they could see it just over their heads. The candlelight glinted off something shiny, and as they went in farther, they could see that the room was filled with boats. Row upon row of them, all just like the one in the first room. There must be hundreds, Lina whispered. Enough for everyone, I suppose, said Doon. They wandered around a bit, but there wasn't really much to see. All the boats were the same. Each one contained 2 metal boxes and 2 paddles. The room was cold, and the air felt heavy in their lungs. The candle flames burned weakly. So they went back to the small room and slid the door closed behind them. I guess, said Lina, that this first boat is meant as a sort of sample. We learn what's on the one that has signs, boat, paddles, candles, matches. They went back out to the river's edge. Lina blew out her candle and began closing up the boxes they'd opened. Doon blew out his too. I'm going to take my candle with me, he said, to look at later. I want some matches as well. He took a packet of matches from the box and tucked it inside his shirt. Lina returned the boxes to the boat room and slid the door closed. Then she and Doon stood together on the ledge and gazed down. Less than a foot below, the river rushed by. A short distance downstream, it plunged into the dark mouth in the wall and disappeared. Well, he said, we've found it. We've found it, Lina repeated, wonderingly. And tomorrow, at the start of the singing, said Doon, we'll stand up in Harkin Square and tell the whole city. When they came up out of the pipeworks, it was nearly 6 o'clock. They hadn't realized they'd been down there so long. Both Doon's father and Mrs. Murda would be wondering where they were. They stood for a moment under a lamp-post, just long enough to agree on a time to meet the next day and plan their announcement. Then they hurried home. When Doon's father asked why he was so late, he said his song rehearsal had gone long. He wanted to shout out to his father, "We found the way out! We're saved!" But he held himself in for the sake of his moment of glory. Tomorrow, when his father saw him on the steps of the gathering hall, would be so overcome with surprise and pride that he would go weak in the knees, and the people standing next to him would have to catch him and hold him up. And the announcement about the thieving mayor, that would probably happen tomorrow too. Doon had almost forgotten about it in the excitement of finding the boats, the mayor's arrest, and the city's rescue both at once. It was going to be an amazing day. Racing thoughts kept Doon awake almost until morning. The day of the singing was a holiday for the entire city. All the stores and other businesses were closed. This meant that Doon didn't have to go to the pipeworks. His father didn't have to go to his shop either, but he was going to go anyhow. If he wasn't in his shop fussing with his merchandise, he didn't know what to do with himself. Doon dawdled over his breakfast of carrot sticks and mashed turnips, waiting for his father to go. He wanted to get ready for the journey down the river. They probably wouldn't leave for a few days. He and Lina would make their announcement tonight, and people would need time to get organized before they could leave the city. But he was too excited to sit around doing nothing. As soon as his father left, Doon slipped the case off his pillow. This would be his traveling pack. He put in the candle and the matches. He put in the key he'd borrowed from the pipeworks office. He put in a good-sized piece of rope that he'd found at the trash heaps and had been saving for years, and a bottle for water. He put in an ancient folding knife that his father had given him, which had come down through generations of his family, and which he used to chop off his bangs when they got so long they tickled his eyelids. He put in some extra clothes in case he got wet, and some paper and a pencil so that he could write a record of his journey. Along with these things, he crammed in a small blanket, it might be cold in the new city, and a packet of food, 6 carrots, a handful of vitamins, some peas and mushrooms wrapped in a lettuce leaf, 2 boiled beets, and 2 boiled turnips. That should be enough. Surely when they got to where they were going, the people who lived there would give them something to eat. He tied the top of the pillowcase in a knot, and then he untied it again. He might want to add something else. He stood in the middle of the apartment and looked around at the jumble of stuff. There was nothing else here that he wanted to take with him. No, there was one thing. He went back into his room. From beneath his bed he pulled out the pages of his bug book. He leafed through it. The white spider, the moth with the zigzag pattern on its wings, the bee striped brown and yellow on its rear end. He looked at his drawings for a long time, memorizing their beauty and strangeness. Tiny fringes of hair, minute claws, jointed legs. Should he take this with him? There might not be creatures like this where they were going. He might never see such things again. But no, he'd leave it behind. His pack should be small and light. He put the bug book back under his bed and pulled out the box where he kept the green worm. He drew back the scarf to check his captive one more time. Several days before, the worm had done a curious thing. It had wrapped itself up in a blanket of threads. Since then, it had hung motionless from a bit of cabbage stem. Doon had been watching it carefully. Either it was dead, or it was undergoing the change that he'd read about in a library book but could hardly believe was true, the change from a crawling thing to a flying thing. So far, the bundled-up worm had shown no signs of life. But now he saw that it was wriggling. The whole wrapped-up bundle, which was shaped like a large vitamin pill, bent slightly from side to side, then was still, then bent back and forth again. Something was pushing at the top end of it, and in a moment, the threads there split apart, and a dark, furry knob emerged. Doon watched, holding his breath. Next came 2 hair-like legs, which clawed and plucked at the blanket. In a few minutes, the whole creature was out. Egress! Thought Doon with a smile. The creature's wings were crushed flat against its body at first, but soon they opened. And Doon saw what his green worm had become, a moth with light brown wings. He lifted the box and carried it to the window. He opened the window and held the box out into the air. The moth waved its feathery feelers and took a few steps along the wilted cabbage leaf. For several minutes it stood still, its wings trembling slightly. Then it fluttered up into the air, rising higher and higher until it was just a pale spot against the dark sky. Doon watched until the moth disappeared. He knew he'd seen something marvelous. What was the power that turned a worm into a moth? It was greater than any power the builders had had, he was sure of that. The power that ran the city of Ember was feeble by comparison, and about to run out. For a few minutes he stood by the window looking out over the square and thinking again about what to pack for his journey. Should he put in anything like nails or wire? Would he need money? Should he take some soap? And then he laughed and struck a hand against his head. He kept forgetting that the entire population of the city would be with him on this trip. If he needed something he didn't have, someone would surely be able to supply it. So he tied a knot in his pillowcase and was about to close the window when he caught sight of 3 burly men wearing the red and brown uniform of the city guard striding into the square. They stopped and looked around for a moment. Then one of them confronted old humpback Nammy Proggs, who was standing not far from the entrance to the small items shop. The guard towered over her, and she twisted her head sideways and squinted up at him. Doon could hear the guard's voice clearly. "We're looking for a boy named Harrow." "Why?" said Nammy. "Spreading vicious rumors," was the answer. "Do you know where he is?" Nammy hesitated a moment, and then she said, "Went off to the trash heaps just a minute ago." The guard nodded curtly and beckoned to his companions. They marched away. Spreading vicious rumors? Doon was so stunned that he stood still as a stone for a long minute. What could they possibly mean? But there was only one answer. It had to be what they'd told the assistant guard about the mayor. Why were they calling it a vicious rumor? It was the truth. He didn't understand it. He did understand, though, that Nammy Proggs had done him a favor. She must have seen that the guards meant him no good. She'd protected him, at least for the moment, by sending the guards to the wrong place. Doon forced his mind to slow down and think, why did the guards think he and Lina were lying? Obviously, they hadn't investigated the room in Tunnel 351. If they had, they'd have known he and Lina were telling the truth. He could think of only one other possibility. The guards, at least some of them, already knew what the mayor was doing. They knew about it and wanted it to stay a secret. And why? It was clear the guards, too, were getting things from the storerooms. It had to be the answer. For a moment, the fear he'd felt when he saw the guards was replaced by rage. The familiar hot wave rose in him, and he wanted to grab a handful of his father's nails or pot shards and throw them against the wall. But all at once he remembered if the guards were after him, they'd be after Lina, too. He had to warn her. He dashed down the stairs, his anger turning into power for his running feet. Whoa! From a beautiful moth emerging from a chrysalis to the guards are after him. What a twist! We'll find out more in the next segment.